So Baruch Hashem, we're holding by at the middle of Amud Mem Vov, and we just completed our explanation of Shemi in the Pasuk Kol Hanikra B'Shmi V'Lichvedi B'Rasiv Yatasiv Avasisiv in Yeshaya, which we explained was a reference to Eilumis Atzilus Bri Yitzir Asiya, and Shemi is a reference to Atzilus. So ha'ara bilvad, this meyuchad, elikus, and we brought the mashal of keiches hanefesh, which the keiches hanefesh are similarly a ha'ara bilvad. They're not etzem hanefesh, not atzmiyim, but they're nafshiyim. They're meyuchad with the nefesh. Now the Maimon is going to continue and explain B'rasiv Yitzasiv Ha'asisiv Eilim is Biyah. Okay. And this is going to take us to Mem Tes, to Amud Mem Tes. The end of the second paragraph. It says a paragraph begins with Zeh Mashikosu Kaved Malchuscha. That's already the next bit. That's explaining the union of Kavedi in the pasuk. Kavedi B'Rasiv. And we have a whole arichas there on the next phase. For this moment, we're going to go from the middle of Mem Vav until just over halfway down Mem Tes, and that will be the beer of Eilam is Biyah, in contrast to the nature and the characteristics of Eilam Atzilus. Okay, let's get into it. Eilam is Biyah, the Eilam is Bri Yitzir Asiya, Heim Nivraim bebechinas Yesh Ugvul Mamish. In contrast to Atzilus, even the Kalim of Atzilus, which are Elikus, the Eilumis of Biyah are Nivroim. They're not Ne'et Solim, they're Nivroim. And a Nivra is something which is a Yesh and has a Gvul, without any questions. None of this sort of relative Gvul, Tziyur Mugbul, some elements of it, but still a Ha'ara Bilvad, which is Muyuchad with the Etzem. When it comes to Nivroim Biyah, they are Gvul Mamish. Je'einam b'chinas muhus elikus. And they are not elikus in the manner in which Atzilus is elikus. Hagam she'ein lecha davar shechutz mimenu. Even though there's no such thing as anything that can be external to Hashem. So what does it mean it's not elikus? Everything's elikus, l'cheira. Because ein lecha davar shechutz mimenu. Mikol Mokim, okay, on one madreg you're right. Everything's alikus. Chudei lo, everything's alikus. Mikol Mokim, harim nirim the Matthias yesh v'dov nifrat. They appear to be a thing which is a Matthias, and they are negeda of nifradim, nivroim, nifradim, yeshus, gvul, ad sheyuchli b'hem chet v'avin. To the extent where they can do something which is a chetva, what's the taisha chetva? Something which is negative, so it's barich. Atzilus is nothing which is against the ratzon of Hashem. When it comes to Eilam Biyah, you already have the possibility of something being against the ratzon of Hashem. They're so not miyuchad. They're so not they're so nivroim. They're so nifrodim. They're such a metzius that it's shaykh the inyan of chet. She'osim b'chinas pirud mamash chudi. And then when the chet in the oven is actualized, that is the pshat, when something is separate from Hashem. No, we're not just talking about anoshim shveilim, lowly creatures. Even malachim al yoinim. It's shaykh, there can be a chet for oven, and it can be a shaykh in of hafrada.
In malachim.
In the malachim.
They don't have a
Ukamoi, like it says in the Gemara, afkuhu lamatat. In the Gemara in Chagiga, where it explains how Acher, Mishman Avuya, ended up being Ketis Benatiyas, ended up being going away from and going away from Emunah to Eir and Hashem. What happened? How did it happen? When he went into the Pardes, what he saw was the Malach Matatron, sitting writing down the Zechuyas of the Yidden, and he made him think, 1 second, I thought everything was the Eibishter, now I see a Malach decides whether something's good, something's bad. And it started making him think that there were 2 Rishis. It wasn't just 1 Rishis. It's different powers. So afterwards, Matat was punished. Afkuhu Matat. They took him out and they punished him.
Well, why is it with an abbreviation?
No. In the Gemara, it actually writes. I think the Gemara in Lashon it says it out fully in Metatron. Don't know.
Can you explain what that means?
That the Malach was able to do something that was wrong.
Oh, it was wrong for him to write his clothes for Yisrael.
He was putting on a bit of a show or doing something.
He couldn't really, he could.
He
would.
No, he couldn't.
He was pretending he could.
Yeah, he did something wrong. So the point over here is saying that even Malachim El Yonim, a Shaykh Chet V'Av in a Shaykh Pirud.
How?
He's saying they can only be Shluchim with the Eibishter.
No, in Russia they don't have Nosh Bahamas. They don't have Nosh Bahamas.
As we state. Kol Shkeim B'Nivroim Shlamatas. If that's Shaykh by Malachim El Yonim, how much more so by Nivroim Shlamata? Shaykh Be'em Chet V'Avim. We all know that Nivroim Shlamata, for sure a Shaykh for them, very plausible for them to do Chatoim and Avenis. So Hepech Legamri Me'adveikas Vayichud Atzilus, which is a clear example of how it is the complete opposite of the nature of Atzilus. In Atzilus, there's Dveikus. In Atzilus, there's Yichud. That's the nature of Atzilus. Whereas in Biyah, it's not the case. So the Im came moving. If so, it's therefore understood. Actually, you can't transition from the Olam of Atzilus to the Olamus of Biyah without there being a fundamental concealment, if you want, but a fundamental removal, to an extent, being careful with my words here, of this Eir of Atzilus. As long as there's an Eir of Atzilus, it's not possible to evolve for there to be a process where from Atzilus there can be an Ilav Olul, and you're going to get Ilam Isbiyah. Ilam Atzilus and Ilam Isbiyah are diametrically opposite. Ilam Atzilus is Yichud Dveikus. Ilam Isbiyah is Pirud and Metzius and Yeshus and Gvul. So how do you get the transition from Ilam Atzilus to the Ilam Isbiyah? There has to be a hest of a helm of Atzilus. Hainu explains. She's obvious to be we cannot have a normal chain-like process whereby from the Madrega El Yoina can be nishtalshel the Madrega Tachtoina, because however much of that processing you're going to do with the Eir of Atzilus, you're never going to get the model of Eilam Biyah, because the fundamental principle of Eilam Atzilus is Dveikus and Elikus. Is itself Elikus. Elikus is not just all of a sudden going to become Dvarim Nifradim, Nivraim. K'moya Yishtalshus Ba'atzilus Atzmei Shu B'chinas Ilav in Atzilus itself, whereas Kula Elikus, you have Yishtalshus Ilav Chachma Datzilus, Bina Datzilus, and Azivaita. Chol Ilav Olul Hari Be'erech Zelazeh. Why can it not be Ilav Olul? As we've explained earlier, my morning. When it comes to Ilav Olul, the Ilah has to be Be'erech the Olul. Has to be of the same kind. It's of a different magnitude. The Ilah is of a greater magnitude, and the Olul is of a lower magnitude. But they're of the same ilk, they're of the same kind. They're Be'erech Zelazeh. Shah Olul hu Be'erech ha'Ilah. What the Ilah, through the tzimtzum of the Ilah, to produce the Olul, it doesn't cause, it's not through sort of separating them, it's through kiruv, it's a closeness. It's a bringing out an aspect of the Ilah into the Olul. So they have to be of the same order. So what's the example of that? What's the example of Ilah Olul? Shalafi erech haseichel kein heim hamidlis. This is what we explained a lot in Shuvi Yisrael. That the erech, the hisponenus, is going to be the outcome of the midas, the av and yira, as a reaction to it. Yeah? So the be'erech zelazah. One determines the other in a manner which is, relatable. But if you want to go from Olam Atzilus Ne'etzolim to Nivroim Metzias Yesh, you cannot use the process of Ilav Alu. Doesn't matter how many times you're going to try and reduce the intensity of Atzilus. You're not going to turn Elokus into Dvarim Gashmim. Ilav Alu won't work, because Ilav Alu doesn't fundamentally object to the presence and the nature of the Ilah. The Alu acknowledges where it comes from. It's dependent on where it comes from. The middays are dependent on the seichel, which gives birth to them. But when it comes to Bri Yesh Me'ayin, it's a different matter. So Ki'im B'derech Bri Yesh Me'ayin. If you want to produce Eilam Biyah, you're not just going to have an orderly transition from Atzilus. You need to effect a Bri Yesh Me'ayin. The Hainu, what do you mean Bri Yesh Me'ayin? Where the ayin is ayin ayin miloshin any yadua. Not known. It's not known. It's not understood. It's completely concealed and hidden and not apparent. As the yesh was aware of its makeh, its sherish makeh, it wouldn't be a yesh. It would cease to be a yesh. So the manner in which you can create a yesh is by concealing the ayin. Concealing the sherish makeh amahave has to be in a state of helen v'hester. In a manner where the hashpah is a hashpah mutzumtzemes, a very limited and restricted hashpah. And furthermore, the hashpah is in a manner of richuk erech, completely, disassociated from the thing that is being created. So that's the matter. We've already had we talked a lot before about Ilav Alu, earlier by morning. Here's bringing out the point about Bri Yesh Me'ayin. How do you pull off the transition from Atzilus to Biyah? If Biyah is Taka, as even like we're saying, that it's Dvarim Nifradim, Dvarim Gashmiyim, Nivraim, Yeshus, Metzias, all those things, which is the exact opposite of what Atzilus is, which is Yichud and Achdus and Dveikus. How do you get from one to the other? So the way you get from one to the other is by a process called Bri Yesh Me'ayin, which we're now going to elaborate on. What is this process of Bri Yesh Me'ayin that we're talking about? How does it achieve the concealment and the detachment, in a sense, of the Eir of Atzilus, such that it becomes possible that you can have the Nivroim and the Yeshus and the Metzias of Eilam Biyah. Okay? Now we're going to go back to Dibur. We're going to re-engage with the topic of Dibur that we talked about so much in the first Maimah. But we're going to talk about it in a slightly different way. Because when we be talking about Dibur in the first Maimah, we were talking about Dibur's impact on the speaker. Right? The relationship of the Dibur with the Medaber. Where now, in this Maimah, the emphasis is going to be more on the relationship of the Dibur with the Zulas. What is that relationship? Now Like we say in ve-Aravah, the basar ma'amaris nivra ha'olam. There's with 10 statements that the world was created. With dibur, the world was created. Vayom Elokim ye'ir, ye'ir rakia, shemibchinas ha'amira v'had dibur davka, mizeh nishavu ha'nivroim chuli. It's from the statements of Brius HaElamis that we have the beginning of Bereshis, that the world came into being. So what does it mean? In order for there to be the world, in order for there to be the Yeshus, in order to be the Metzias Yesh, in order for there to be Nivroim, which is what we're talking about over here, how was that possible? That was possible because of Dibur, that the transition from Atzilus to Eilamis Biyah, the creation of the Eilamis, B'chinas Yesh V'dov Nifrad B'fnei Atzmon, that was achieved through Dibur. So we're now going to chaza over some of the points we made in the first Maimah when we were defining Dibur. What are the defining features of Dibur? That it's nira v'nigla k'moishul nifra v'yoytze b'lachutz. That Dibur is something which is, noticeable, recognizable, is externalized. V'eina kamei machshava, which is not like thought, in contrast to thought. Again, things we mentioned earlier. Shehi misachedes yosim ha'adam v'seichel adam. A person's thought processes are much more synonymous with the self and with the person's thinking process and his intellectual processing. The person's thinking is constantly in flow. It's constantly flowing. And so too, when it comes to the letters, the actual letters and wording of what person's thinking, it's only noticeable. So a person can't read your thoughts. It's only noticeable to yourself.
On the difference.
And they're not externalized, etc. Yes.
If we have the nefesh, we have the nefesh itself with the kirchas of the nefesh. So we say that the kirchas of the nefesh are, let's say they're like nafshi. Like see the areas they're not like gilu in the standard sense of the way gilu works, but it's like closer to the nefesh. It's nafshi. So where would the machshava be on the? It's machshava is not levush, and it's not gilu.
It's a levush. We call that levushim.
Right.
But it's a levush hamiyuchad. There's dargas in levushim. There's levush hamiyuchad and there's levush hanifrad. So machshava is called levush hamiyuchad, and dibur is called levush hanifrad.
Right, of course. And that'd be closer than kirchas nafshi to the nefesh.
Which would be closer?
Machshava.
No.
Right.
Because you can easily change a machshava. Can't change its seichel and midah so quickly.
Even the machshava says Thomas has that line over
there. It's constant, but it's not fixed. You can be a Masech Das from one thing and think about another thing. It's like a levush in the sense you can take it off and you can put on a different levush. But you always have to be wearing a machshava. You have to be wearing that clothes. You can just change to a different type of clothing.
Mm-hmm. So why do you have to always? What makes it mashita to be mashita to?
Because it's miyuchad with the nefesh, and the nefesh is constant.
And the kirchas nafshim aren't one with the nefesh.
They're also constant.
Kirchas. The ability to be megadol.
There's elements of the kirchas constantly. So when it comes to machshava is something which is constant. And the oisiyos are only internal and they're not external. When it comes to dibur, dibur, some people speak all the time, but dibur doesn't have to be all the time. People can stop speaking. It does get interrupted. Like the pasuk says, it's time to speak, it's time to be quiet. And they also are externalized. So these are the two things that we're emphasizing in the moment. That the constancy of it, machshava is constant, dibur is temporary. Machshava is internal and dibur is external. But then he brings out what is the fundamental difference between it. The main difference between machshava and dibur is in the very letters of thought and speech. They are fundamentally different. Eisis hamachshava heim bechinas heder hayeshus adayin. Why do the eisis hamachshava? Why are they only noticeable to themselves? Why are they internalized? What's the internal element? What makes them so internalized? Is because the eisis themselves are not quite substantive yet. They lack substance. But when it comes to the letters of speech, they are substantiated already. They are materialized. And that's why they are externalized. They're able to be externalized. To the point where another person is able to feel them. Another person through the tools of their hearing, they can hear them. I mean, further, technical tools, you can examine speech and the speech waves. It's murgash, but the Eitzes Machshava are not Behedar Yeshus. They're not Metzius yet, and therefore they cannot be. There's nothing to externalize. That's why a person is able to. When they can think much quicker than they can speak, because there's not the Hagbola of the Eitzes. The Eitzes are not so murgash at the moment. They don't. There's no. They're not. Each letter is not bestira to the other letter, right? You can think things much quicker than you can speak them. So kol inyan adibur l'tzerich zulasi davka, and this is really the whole. Is a very important statement. The whole point of speech is the tzerich zulasi davka, is for the sake of the other. It's not for the sake of the self. Purpose of speech is not for oneself. When a person's in the shaping of a person, we've described till now the etzem hanefesh, we described the seichel, the middos, machshava, dibur. What are the point of all these things? Dibur is a koyach or a levush of the nefesh. Why does the nefesh have the levush of dibur? What's its purpose? Its purpose is l'tzerich azulas, is in order to communicate with somebody else. The reason you can speak is in order to communicate with somebody else. You might think that's just like sort of a basic statement. It doesn't mean anything. You're going to see this is a very foundational statement and a very important statement. But give it a chance to breathe, and we'll breathe out. Ki la'atzmai ein tzarich l'dibur klal. A person for themselves, they don't need speech at all. Only in order to reveal to somebody else the things that they're trying to communicate. Now, the very important bracket over here, because we just spent our whole maim at the beginning, and our whole thrust of the hemshekh has been the profound impact of dibur on the self. And even though through speaking, a person does get immensely enhanced. Kanal b'inyin b'ni yisei rechuli, like we explained above in the first maimah about b'ni yisei b'isha. That's not mitzvah dibur itself. That's true. Dibur does have this quality, and it is very profoundly impactful on the self. But that's not because of dibur, mitzad atzmai. Dibur, because it is the koyach tachton, it's the seifon, it fulfills what it says in the Sefer Yetzirah, a principle that not tchilas and b'seifon. The beginning is always implanted and embedded in the end. So the reason why dibur is able to be ma'ira, the etzem, which then triggers the keach hamaskil, that a person is able to have an enhanced giluyim of seichel, or the same thing with middos, which all the things we explained, is not because of dibur, mitzad atzma. It's not a quality in dibur, mitzad atzma. It's a quality in dibur which comes by dint of it being a tachtin, a sof. Aval etzem ad-dibur eina b'shvil atzma. The dibur itself, its own quality, is that it's not for the self. It's for the other person. It's a very complicated bracket, that. And it would be nice if there was a bigger bracket to help solve the strong contrast with what we're explaining here about Dibur to what we explained in the first Maimah. That we have to do our own work to make them work together. But as I said before, the important thing is to remember is in the first Maimah the emphasis is Dibur legabi atzmai. And here the important thing it's trying to explain is Dibur legabi hazulas. Dibur has all the qualities it said in the first Maimah legabi atzmai. It will have all the qualities that's over here. But the Ikka Inyan of Dibur, which is pointing out over here, is L'Shvel Azulas. And that's all I'm going to say on it for the moment.
What's wrong with that?
If it works,
why is that to its detriment?
There's
the whole point is it's more chsinistic than okay, but it still has all the miles that we explained previously.
Yep.
It's not really stir b'chlal, it's just...
I didn't say, that's not stir. It's more about the emphasis. When you're going in the flow of the hemshekh, you've got one orientation, the Gabi Dibur, until now, and then there's quite a shift here. So it's just being able to manage that shift.
And you think that the brackets are there to try and help you manage that shift?
Yes. But some of us need a bit more. On Masha ha'oisius hadibur megalim zulasi. What is it that the oisius hadibur are communicating to the other person? What are they revealing to the other person? Or this ability that the oisius dibur have to reveal to the other person, zeu lefisha ha'oisius ma'alimim masdirim ala'ay. The ability that the oisius have, if the whole inyan of Dibur is to be megala to the Zulas, is to be able to communicate something to another person. What quality does Dibur have that enables it to communicate things which are otherwise pnimi, otherwise internal? A person has an internal workings of their seichel, their midis, and their machshava. Dibur is the tool which can communicate that to another person. What is it in Dibur that allows it to be able to share things which were otherwise hidden? So he explains it's because the Oisius had Dibur are a complete blackout on the Oir. The Oir mitzaratzmai cannot be shared. The Oir pnimi, seichel, the middays, machshava, they're all internalized. Right? There's no yeshus. There's heder yesh. What do we say? Machshava can't be communicated. A person doesn't know what you're thinking fundamentally because the oisius, machshava, are heder metzias. They lack any yeshus, and therefore they're not shareable. So what Dibur does is it sort of materializes that which was otherwise non-communicable. And it does that by, first of all, concealing and hiding the brightness to an extent, the intensity of the Oir Pnimi. But in a manner which it can then be shared with another person, as he's now going to explain. An Oir Pnimi from Seichel and Middays, even in Machshava, is not possible to be revealed to another person. Even when a person speaks, they don't share absolutely everything. They're only able to share an Oir Chitzeni, something very superficial and peripheral to what the person is most fundamentally what a person fundamentally contains. Kiyadu. The the letters of Dibur, which is the human quality to produce what? To produce words, physical words. If you think about the human being, like, you're able to self-generate something physical. The Isis Dibur.
Is sound physical?
Yeah.
Okay. Is time physical?
Yes. So since the Isis Dibur are themselves material letters, they're measurable letters, right? You can measure them. Sound waves, you can measure them. There's a distinction between one, there's a discernible way to distinguish between one phoneme and another phoneme. L'chein hem bechinas levush hamalim u'maste ala'ei ba'ofen sheyuchel iskalas alazulas. So they are, the Isis Adibur are material letters which are able to be a keli for the oir and to conceal that oir. Masha en kinesa machshava, which machshava can't do. Shein bechinas levush tak, because it's a very edele levush. They're not able to shield and hide the oir in the way that dibur can. Kim Isis Adibur, only Isis Adibur fisha. Heim bechinas yesh yesa. Heim bechinas levush hamaster yesa. The more material the Isis, the better they are at concealing the oir. They are yodam davka yuchel liyes nimshach oir azulas. To the extent where it's possible that an oir, truly only an oir chitzeni, but an oir nevertheless, which was otherwise not able to be communicated, is now able to be communicated to azulas, to an other. He goes further. Be'emes ha'oisis misad atzmam hey ma'alim mastirim legamri ala'ei. What type of helen v'hester do the Isis do? Isis Hadibur are not just they don't engage with the Oir HaSeichel or the Oir HaMidas, whatever you happen to be communicating, in a manner where it dims the intensity, it reduces them. It reduces the intensity of the oir such that it can become fathomable and communicable. No. They're malim masim legamri. Isis Adibur have absolutely nothing to do with the seichel which they're communicating. Just a bunch of sounds. It's like code. It's like it becoming encoded in something completely foreign.
But once you give meaning to the sound, then surely it does.
In a second. The Masha Mavinas Aseichel Mitoicha Isis. This that it's possible to comprehend the idea that is being communicated through these letters is Hainu Davka Mishu Baseichel Be'etzem. Who can do that? Only somebody who is already a Bar Seichel and knows the code. Avala Cotton, but a child. They might know their whole alphabet. They might even know words. But and they can pronounce the words. They can't understand the Haskalah of the Isis. Because the Isis do not reveal at all the Seichel. He had to prior to the communication already be a chacham, know the code. How do you maybe this askal he can then decipher the particular haskalah that's being communicated through these asias. Aval mahusa asias atzmon ubechinas helen legabi mahusa seichel v'amidus. But it's not the pshat that it's like a funnel, a filter, a conduit, whatever you want to call it, of a means of transferring something which was non-communicable and just communicating it in this way, and it's just a sort of a natural progression. Rather, it's this system of dibur, which is a helen behester legamri. The Isis are because of their hakshama, their material nature, they are completely a complete concealment. So when we say that the world was created with dibur, we're explaining, when we say asar, and it says in Pirkei Avos, asar ma'amordus nevra elam, we're explaining how it was possible from Atzilus for there to be the hisavus of Eilamus Biyah. Dibur is the mashal to explain how the Eir of Atzilus was, in a sense, communicated, conveyed into Eilamus Biyah to make it plausible, feasible, that there should be a Metzias Yesh. So from this mashal of Dibur, we can understand in the Nimshal the way it is Lamayla. The Eisis Dibur Elyon, the Bechinas Malchus, Heim Eisis Bechinas Yesh Kivyach. So what is Dibur Elyon? Dibur Elyon is Malchus. Davke Chitzayin is Malchus. The Heim Bechinas Eisis Hama'alimu Mastirim Al Eirat Atzilus. So the Dibur Elyon, the Eisis are Dibur, which is the Eisis of Malchus. We're using the mashal and everything all laid on top of each other. But what we're talking about is Malchus of Atzilus. Malchus of Atzilus is Ma'anu Master Legamri on the Eir of Atzilus. Shubichinas Levush HaMaster is a Eir. V'lachein Mizetaku Yuchuli is Hafez and Ibrahim Debiyah. And that's why it's plausible for there to be the transition from Atzilus into the, which is Netzalim, Yuchadim, Ivachayu Ichad, Ivagam Huichad, for that to be in Ibrahim of Biyah, Yesh V'dov Nifrat. V'akel in the Esespheres to Biyah, Shem Gam Kim Bechinas Yesh Nivra Chuli K'Moshe Kosuv Begeres HaKodesh.
It's not an Ilava law.
You can guess where in the Geres HaKodesh.
Oh.
And of course in Simon Chav.
And
So
it has to be Malchus Atzilus.
Malchus Atzilus.
Even though it's Ishmael, it has to be something that.
I didn't understand the question.
You're saying that Malchus can be Milan Gamri, or it is?
It does. That is the process.
So forget Bria, just it, as it is to itself, it's Milan Gamri. Or as it is Mislavish in Bria, it is Milan.
It's Pu'ula. It's the way Dibur, the Pu'ula of Dibur, of Malchus Vatzilis is a sort of the means by which there's the creation of the.
And then it can't be Atzilus then. If even at by itself, it's.
I hear your problem. Hold that for a moment. Ukanal b'moshel. Like we said above in the moshel. In order for the idea or the emotion to be communicated to the other person, who alidei hadibur is through dibur, but lo alidei isis hamachshava, and not through the letters and words of thought. And it's why is it achievable specifically through isis dibur? Because the isis dibur are materialized isis. They're able to do a proper concealment of the Eir to the extent where it can be communicated to the other person. But the Eir which they communicate is only a Eir chitzoni, not the entirety of the idea in its most fundamental way, in the way it's understood by the thinker themselves. The same pattern is applied above in the Nimshal. Through the Oisios of Malchus Vatzilis, Dibur Elyon, it's possible for there to be the revelation to the Zulas. What do we mean here by Zulas? We mean that there can be the entity of a Zulas. The Dibur of Malchus Vatzilis doesn't speak to a Zulas, it produces a Zulas. The Yeshus of, what's a Zula? An other person means something distinct from yourself. That's the very notion of a Yesh V'dov Nifrat. A Metzias, a Nivra. Shenirim Kedov Zulas. His Avazois, who Mibechinas Eisis Adibur. Shu b'chinas l'usham mastir. That's all achieved through what? The letters of speech, which is the garment, is the tool of concealment. Ulafi mashnis boy the muhus isis mitzad atzmi malil mastir malail. Hari yuvan this avas achachma de biyam in adibur elin the malchus tatzilus ein ze kamoy hachacham mikvar shaleimed mitaycha isis shayked nishniven this have hari lo yemitzis achachma klal. So what we explained negated dibur, that the isis had dibur are a code. And in order for the person to understand the code, they have to be themselves a chacham mikvar. This is where the mashal doesn't apply in the nimshal. Because in the mashal of Dibur, the zulas already exists. And he was already a chacham. The one you're talking to, who already knows the code of the Isis and how he explains that, how it's possible to be used to explain that haskalah. Yeah? But in the case of Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus creating chachma of Eilam Abriya, the Chachma of Eilam Habriya is not able to comprehend the Dibur.
Right.
Because it didn't exist before the Dibur. Couldn't have been a Chacham Mikvar.
It can decipher its own seichel, surely, though. Just like in a...
Maybe through Avodah. But it's not.
It's
The point
not,
is, it's Yesh Ma'ayin, that the Yesh is not aware of the Ayin.
so it knows there's a code, but doesn't know what the code says.
It knows it exists.
It knows that it comes from something.
Everyone knows they come from something. They just don't know what it is.
Do they?
No one comes from no one just from nowhere.
Yes, mine.
It's not nowhere. Ayin is not nowhere.
Uh-huh.
So let me just read that again. Lufi mashnis boy the muhusa oisinus at atmi malim mastim alohin. Hari yuvan. In this case, in the nimshal, this abbas achachma de biyah min adibur elin machzat tzilus ein ze kamay achacham mikvar shaloi mit mitoicha oisis shekein shnever v'nisave hari lo yoyim etzias chachma klal. Verstehst du? Yeah, how it's read? Bim kein hari adibur v'oisis the malchus ta'atzilus hey ma'alimim u'matzpinim al achabad v'hamidus hamislapshim b'dibur. So these oisis of malchus ta'atzilus, they're completely concealing the Chabad and the midlis of Atzilus, which are mislabish in the Dibur. Shleis kale klal bebriya, it shouldn't be at all apparent to Briya. Kim eiz arim wetis ma'id. Arachit saying is the arim wetis. K'maya oid an nimshach aydei Cyrus. Is the mashal of the oid which is nimshach aydei Cyrus. What's the oid nimshach aydei Cyrus? That the hair receives its chayas through the skull. And the skull is like is this hemshekh, is this great barrier between the the koiches pnimium in the brain and the head and the skull, and you got the head. The skull becomes a big barrier, and so there you have a chayes mu'etes to the point where you can cut off the hair and it doesn't hurt. You pull the hair, it will hurt a little bit. It won't hurt as much as if you pull your finger off. You can even pull the hair out and it won't hurt too much. And that is the Arim Etes that goes to the Cyrus. It's Chayas, it grows, it's alive, but it's the Arim Etes. So Al Derech Zeh, the Chayas, which is Nimshach into Ilmis Biyah, is like the Chayas, which would be, Al Derech Dugma will be Nimshach to the hair. Because the Malchus Ta'atzilus, Dibur Ha'elyin, the Oisius of Malchus Ta'atzilus, are completely Mailim Mastir on the Oiris of Atzilus, which is necessary because otherwise you wouldn't be able to produce the Olamis of Biyah of Dvarim Nifradim, Yesh V'Dava Nifrad. They would be so aware of their Sherish Amokeh, they become completely bottom. And the whole purpose was they should be a Yesh V'Dava Nifrad. So that is the process, and that is the moshel of Dibur, as Dibur functions in Malchus of Atzilus. Legabi Biyah. Remember, till now, even in the first Maimon, when we talked about Malchus, we were talking about Malchus as it was facing upwards, right? As it was facing Legabi Zah. Malchus Atzilus is Mamshek Kesel Zah, right? And all those things. It's not. These two components of Malchus are going to come together later on in the hemshekh. So we're going to get the whole picture together. But at the very moment, you've got to. in a sense, put a pause a little bit on the emphasis and the focus of both Dibur as it is in the Mashal, the way it is in Nefesh Adam, and Dibur the way it is Lamayla, Dibur Elyon, the way it is in Malchus Atzilus, because there it was talking about Dibur and Malchus Atzilus, Lagabi Zol, Lagabi Keser, or Lagabi Etzem HaNefesh. And here we're talking about it Lagabi, the Zulas, what function it does, how it processes the Keiches Elyonim, or the Eiros Elyonim in the case of the Nimshal, and is able to communicate them to the Zulas. And never forget that this is the fundamental purpose of Dibur. Purpose of Dibur is not in order to enhance your own understanding of your ideas, which you thought you had an idea, so by speaking it out, you're going to be enhanced. Shkoyach. That's not the point why you have Dibur. It's a benefit of Dibur, but it's not the purpose of Dibur. Dibur is Bishvil Azulas. Malchus, Dibur Elyin is Bishvil Azulas, in order to create Eilam Esbiyah. But we're already seeing the fundamental contrast between Eilam Atzilus and the Etzalim, Yuchadim, Gumoichad, Tveikus, all of this Elikus. They may have a Tziyah Mugbul, but they're still Elikus. Even the Kelim of Atzilus are Elikus. Masha Enkein, Eilam Esbiyah, where you have this Helen Vehester Legamri, which is achieved through Malchus of Atzilus, Dibra Elyin, that there can be a Yesh V'Dav Nifrad, a Metzias, and Nivraim. And next year we'll continue about how this, and we'll spell out a little bit more how this plays out.